So we only have a small set of services that we can actually use.
Right. We use it for developing. We're developing apps for other teachers to use, and so we use it to develop those apps.
Cool.
So let me see. We've got Bev here. I guess we're just missing Ben and also Rohit.
But Rohit's emails have been coming back to me undeliverable today.
Oh, really?
I sent today. That's why I was asking if
I see.
we'd heard anything.
Okay, I see. Well, let me see. Let's. Could you send an email to Brent, to Ben, maybe, as a reminder? You know, and Rohit, you say the emails are bouncing back.
The one I sent him just now to say there was one meeting in 10 minutes came back undeliverable.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Are we?
Yeah.
We're not muted right now, are we?
No.
Yes.
Okay. You're muted. Okay.
Oh. Yeah. So we're going to start a presentation, and why don't I get started saying a few words. I do want to say that I had a chance to present in Genoa, Italy, to the NATO group with people in the DoD, and that included Paul Chatelier and Ray Perez and a bunch of people from Europe. And I presented on electronics tutor and a little bit on Pal3, and they were very excited about it. The Navy is excited, and we want to continue their enthusiasm. So when we have our presentation next week on the 7th of October, you know, we want to, one of the agenda items is who says what for today.
Yep, that's 6.
That's number 6. Yeah. Okay. And but I thought at this point we have kind of an agenda here. Kurt, and I'll start with Kurt. Ben already knows this, and I suppose you can catch up with Rohit. We've got the complete scope from Kurt on the knowledge components, and it's always nice to know how much we're going to be covering. The one question I do have is, do we have enough time? Do we have enough? Are we covering too much? That's the one big question I have. And because, and we're going to have some sort of presentation slide on the. Yeah, why don't you bring up? What we've done is looked at the complete scope, and I assume that the sequence would actually be the order in which the material comes in the Navy, the order in which lessons are covered. But we have the scope, and we have all of these different components, and the important thing, I think, is that as we're developing material, we end up filling in, we're developing material that addresses these knowledge components. And I know we carefully, are we at our limit on?
Hello?
I think we accidentally muted you guys.
I think it did that automatically.
And let me just repeat one thing. You know, next week we have a presentation that Brent Oldie and Paul Chatelier will be able to see on the 7th of October. That's an important deliverable day where we kind of deliver the state. And the last item is to address what we're going to be covering at that meeting next week. But now that Ben and Rohit have joined us, and also John, let's pop back to the complete scope from Kurt. Kurt has provided the complete scope, and what I think it's important to do is, as we're developing content, we point to these knowledge components. And is that the one we were doing?
Well, this is the scope that Kurt sent us, and then this is what I Leisha and I have done. When we took a look at what we have to offer in terms of these components so far.
Right. And as you know, we have topics, and those are paired with these, I call them epistemic viewpoints, but other people call them types, like structure, parameters, behavioral state, the physics, the deep physics. You have these, and it's important that as we develop material, we point to the particular knowledge components. And what we're doing is trying to fill out all of these. Some of you, like maybe from WPI, you might not be covering all of them. It may be some subset. But between BB&N and Memphis with AutoTutor and the Dragoon, we want to be able to cover, point to these knowledge components. Kurt, did you want to say anything about this? Comment on this?
Yeah, just that transformer probably isn't in the list. Resistor, capacitor, and inductor are one circuit each. So those early things are really not where our focus should be, because they told us that wasn't where the students were having problems. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. They started having problems with the semiconductors. So we should focus most of our effort on that.
Well, then let me say, Kurt, could you indicate which of these are high priority for us to develop?
Yeah, starting with line 18, diode.
Okay. So starting with line 18. Okay. All righty. And then all the way forward?
Yeah, I can't see below. The blue ones, I guess, are Pal3. Oh, now we start in with some other things. Diode, resistor.
Right, so they're broken up between the devices on top, system in the middle, and then circuits below. So this was from the system for power supply, rectifier, filter, and regulator, and then all of the circuits below that. And there's quite a bit of the circuits, so we didn't know if we needed to cover each one or just some portion of that group.
Well, they're all covered in the native curriculum for the weeks that we're targeting.
Okay.
You can kind of look at that curriculum, which I think I sent to everybody. Let me know if you don't have it. You can get a sense for how fast they go through stuff. Let's see, if you're going to cut stuff out, probably you could cut out the limiters and the scroll down here a minute. The limiters and the clamps could probably be taken out because they never appear again in the curriculum, as far as I can see. They're basically applications of the diodes.
Could we maybe see, like, I understand that, Kurt, you sent this to us, but there's a lot of stuff that was sent, and maybe I just have a hard time knowing exactly what it is.
Right.
Go to space.
Christina, this is what he sent us. It was the Word document, and then that Casey's for electronics, and then what we had done, and I can share this with everyone, is just took a look at the content we currently have and had made a grid of what Kurt sent in the Word document, and then started noting what content we already had and what we needed.
But I also think that Kurt is referring to some worksheets or things from the people at the Great Lakes.
It's in the content.
Can we look at that together so that we know? I know it's in the blankety blank, but I have a real hard time with all these files knowing which one to look at.
Okay, so what you want is the Great Lakes.
Curriculum?
They call them master something or another. Where the heck is it?
The curriculum that you sent us with the red lines on it?
That's
I have it here.
So, look at the screen. Is that what we're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so Christina, did you get that?
Yeah, we have that. It's what's it called again? Whitney?
It's the ETCMS It's in the content folder, ETCMS diodes and transistors, I think.
Okay, good. Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
And then,
It's in the content folder, but it's a PDF.
right. And then the red lines,
ET can skip. Mhm.
can we annotate what those red lines mean again?
Oh, they're just my marks on there to help divide things up.
And then okay.
So, hey, Kurt, can I ask a question? So I'm not an electrical engineer, but I was taking actually this document that came out, and this is what I was running around in my electrical engineering colleagues to basically try to understand what's going on. This is did I give it upside down? It's the one that actually had serial number, it actually had topics beginning with application of Ohm's law, and then it also was annotated with the electronics tutor and also Pal3. And so I think these serial numbers are Dave, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that document's obsolete. That was before we got the actual content from the course, and we were working off of a different course, a much more difficult course.
Oh, okay.
It's really hard for us to follow all that sometimes because I don't understand electronic and engineering at all. So none of these words.
So let me recommend something, and you can have maybe Kurt bless it. Could you get a list of which of the files you should be looking at?
Yep.
And so we'll say, look at file 1 first and 2nd and 3rd. Don't look at the other ones unless you have a good reason to. Would that?
I think there's really only one to look at, which is that Word document that has all the pictures of circuits in it.
This one.
Yeah.
This one that you created.
Yeah, that's the only one you need.
So may I suggest something? Even though I see that you want to start with, they say the students are having trouble, like the diode and the Zener diode, I suggest that if some student is having trouble with that, we have to go back and say something about resistor, capacitor, inductor, and say, maybe certain ones at certain times. So even though I agree our focus should be on diodes and moving forward, the student is obviously having trouble, and it's not necessarily at that point, it's at some point earlier.
Well, we talked about this earlier. Remember, we're talking about 2 sets of...
Right, yes, I know that, but I'm saying we shouldn't just eliminate it from our list at this point. I know what you said, that we'll later go back and fill in.
Yeah, right you are, and everybody is encouraged, if they have any preliminary skill building or whatever, to include that in there. We don't want to leave that out. It's just what we need to do is we were supposed to have, by the end of December, we were supposed to have 2 beta versions for 2 topics. That's transistor and PN junction. But we have alpha versions for 4 other topics.
Okay.
And we're going to have Kurt define what those what those particular topics are, and then we'll have alpha versions, not beta versions, alpha versions of the other content. But you also can have any of the other preliminary stuff. Anything you have, please include it. But for our deliverables, we certainly need to have Dragoon, BB&N material, and Memphis Auto Tutor to be concentrating on the 2 topics plus the 4 topics, right? Okay, yeah. And in fact, as we get to doing the student modeling, there will be time for people that we might recommend to go back and exercise on Ohm's law or something like that. And okay, could you go back with me to that very first one on the content domain that you had? The very first one where you had that one.
Yeah.
What we're doing in Memphis is we're going through with all our materials where a particular problem or curricular activity may point to one or more of these knowledge components. And what we're doing is trying to fill out how many we have in our existing materials. And for example, it's under parameters. Apparently, we've got 12 of
resistor parameters.
Yeah, resistor parameters. Whereas we only have one behavior state. We don't have any for physics. Perhaps for physics, resistor. Of course, that's not a necessary topic. So, yeah, let's move down to the diode.
We have something.
We have a lot of stuff on that, and I'm trying to have at least two. I'd like to have at least two in each of those cells. Why two? Because if we find out after 2 trials with a problem that addresses that knowledge component, that if they still don't have it, they get more than 1 trial. And then, of course, we could go back and have them try an old problem again, perhaps. But we want at least 2 there so they can have 2 cracks at it from any given learning resource. And also, when we get to the point of our recommender system, we're going to have a choice between recommending like another auto tutor, one with a, if they don't do well the first time, we want to have them do another one within the same category, or try a different learning resource. And for, I think at the beginning, we just want to randomly do that, just to see the basic core question: is it better to have more training on the same type of learning resource like Dragoon, AutoTutor, BBNN sort of, or is it better to switch to a different way of looking at it? But what I'd like to do is for those people who are really wanting to contribute content to these, there will be 6 topics, to try to fill out the cells. So as much as possible.
Maybe we're thinking, something we share. I mean, this was one that we have developed, but something along the lines of, where we can keep a tally of what everyone's doing from every different
and
learning resource.
What I would be happy is for at least AutoTutor on those 6 topics and so many, what about 25 or so knowledge components, to have 2 or more activities, learning activities for each one. And then, of course, we can select items in a sensible way. So that's how we're going about that. Kurt, do you think that sounds like a reasonable plan?
Yeah, but looking at this, I realize that we have a level of integration we didn't even know was there that we need to worry about. So I'm just thinking about capacitors. There's 2 ways you can think about capacitors. You can think about them as storing charge, or you can think about them as storing voltage. And we need to be consistent on that. We can't be talking about one like Dragoon's going to always. Mervyn and I talked about this. We decided to go with voltage because it just makes the model simpler. But if you guys write questions in terms of storing charge, well, that's going to be a difference. In the same way with transistors, which can be also viewed as multipliers of current, or an even better one is diodes. If we view diodes as ideal diodes that either pass or don't pass current, then they're actually fairly hard to model. But if you view a diode as something that has a very, very high resistance or a very, very low resistance, then they're easy to model. So we kind of have to, in a few odd places, and there's probably only about 6 or 7 of them, we have to sort of get our act together and speak about the functions of these things with the same set of conventions. And I guess,
yeah, that's an important point. I've had 2 mindsets on like a particular topic, a particular knowledge component. One mindset is that they're tightly coordinated. And I know Dragoon and AutoTutor, we've talked about tight coordination, not only in content, but the underlying epistemology or underlying nomenclature and all. That's the tight coupling, and that would be good. The other end of the spectrum is to have variable viewpoints, where there may be not one way to view the world, that maybe there may be some differences. And so I keep wavering back and forth. If we do the former, there needs to be a step in the process where you'll have to look over, Kurt, whether the way people are looking at things makes sense. If we do it the latter, then where there's not tight coupling, if we do it the latter, then there may be more flexibility. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
So before Kurt responds, if I could just say one thing, I would say that for our standpoint, given the population that we're looking at, that generally what we'd want to do is something that aligns relatively well to what they're going to be used to. So that would seem to me like where the arbiter would be on that. We want things that are, if not emulating what they're doing, or at least coherent with it. So
that option also would require a domain expert.
Yeah. It's similar to the first one.
Materials, there's got to be a step in the process where we can correct ourselves, like maybe a message from Kurt or Ben, or whoever this, or Rowan or something. Somehow we need a step that, to the extent to which you want the content to be aligned with whether it's the Navy way they talk about it or the proper epistemology that Kurt would like, somehow there's got to be a step where somebody looks over the materials and corrects things if they're going down the wrong track.
So, I don't know, make it not, but on that point, who can we send our content to just help us place it on these lists? We've built some content, but we built it with ECE students, so they just know what they're doing in class. I would love to be able to send our content to somebody, and they would say, oh, that belongs here on these lists, or that doesn't belong on the lists at all, or I just have no other way of judging. When Whitney shows me this spreadsheet, it's all Greek, and so I have no idea where the stuff that my ECE students think is good goes. Who can I send it to help with that?
Great question. Right now we're having our engineering students and the content expert, like Vasily Rus, is our local consummate expert, right?
Can I share your local expert?
I
have Neil.
Yeah.
So by the way, let me just share with you actually what I did, because I found this really difficult. Because reading all those documents is very difficult for me, so I ran over to the electrical engineering and computer science building, or not the computer science building, but the EC thing with my electronics folder, and then and then talking to the professors I know on a personal basis. I now know where each of these topics that were in this sheet that I actually shared, which class they're taught at here at WPI, right? And they're taught, 2000 ECE 2010, and then ECE 2019. These numbers mean nothing to you, but this actually helps WPI organize the world. We get down into transistor biasing, and I don't even know what that means, but that's taught by Professor Bader here in 2201. And so I've reached out to him, and then I went and hired actually one of the ECE tutors that actually is on staff. And so I've been trying to actually get Professor Bader to actually kind of get involved in our project, because I don't know anything. But I do know that we could build stuff that should be useful. So at the moment we have what I would actually think of as low quality actually people, that is undergraduates that have actually passed these classes, helping us build content. But I guess actually in my head, in my own mind, just so everyone knows, I'm like, if our goal is transistor biasing, I'm actually asking myself, what are the prerequisites that we actually are expecting people to know, so that we could come in with prerequisite to actually practice when it looks like kids are maybe not knowing those things. So that's like the limit of my understanding of actually how we can be most effective.
And then if something's practice, what do those practice questions look like?
Well, I don't know. Kurt, do you want to, given all this, do you want to say,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Can you hear it? Am I muted? No, I'm not muted. I'm seeing now that I have to write the blurbs that we were hoping to get off Wikipedia. Um, I think at some conversation we had in the past, we recognized the need for like a really short Cliff Notes version for each concept, which means essentially each KC. And we don't have those, and the ones on Wikipedia are way too long or way too short, right, Ben? And we've always thought that we needed those, but we didn't know where to get them. And well, I guess it's time for me to write them. I think I can do that pretty quickly.
Can you include example questions with that? Does that make sense? Does that help? It would help me, I think.
Yes, I can write some example questions with that. For example, well, you'll see what I mean. And let's see. If I do my job right, then Neil and Christina and everybody else can be our quality assurance officers. They can write back and say, this page makes no sense.
And Whitney, too. I think she'd be a good one. She's clever and smart, but doesn't know a lot of ECE.
Exactly. So these should be self-contained intros to these concepts. And if they don't work, then they need to be rewritten. The problem is that the reason we can't find these anywhere is that this course is taught at a kind of intermediate level of expertise, which is very seldom taught. It's not the college level, which has tons of differential equations, and it sure ain't the technician level, which is all about opens and shorts. So that's why we need to write this material. The NEATS manual, which you all have by now, that's what we started from. That's way too detailed. So we need something even shorter and less detailed.
So let me share a couple of things in terms of prerequisites. There's two aspects of prerequisites that seem to occur. One is if you look at the order of lessons in the course, you can kind of think of that ordering as maybe building on prerequisites. So you can assume that at lesson N, the prerequisites were the prior lessons. That's one sense of prerequisites. The other sense of prerequisites are basic quantitative skills, like mathematics and understanding Ohm's law and things like that. That's another sense of prerequisites. And I had always thought that if they were having trouble, but we're only building a prototype right in the middle of the class, reflecting what's important to be doing it. So we're kind of in this special circumstance. But I always thought that we'd start with wherever we are in the curriculum, and if they're having trouble, well, as they go along, if they're having trouble, they'll back up in that order of lessons. But if you find that they're having math problems or something, that we might ask for skill training on the mathematics level. That's the way I was looking at it, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So we have we should probably move on. For right now, we've got kind of a plan.
Oh, wait, one thing is a coordination thing with Pal3. Pal3 also kind of needs these blurbs, and they'll need them a little sooner than than Electronics Tutor probably will for some of the stuff that overlaps in there. So Kurt, you and I should probably coordinate on that. I can also kind of pitch in some effort trying to get some of these done too.
Good.
Here's also one recommendation. I bet you each of our sites are hanging around in electronics. And if you ask them for whatever material you have to do their best to assign them the right knowledge components, that would be a great first pass. So it's a classification task. You have your curricular activities or problems. That points to one or more knowledge components, and they build a mapping, and that can be declared somewhere. But what would be nice is if somebody like Kurt or Ben or whoever to just look over what has been created and to see if it makes sense. That's at least how we're handling it in Memphis. And because there's only so much time that Kurt and Ben has to create these. Yeah.
So, by the way, this is Neil. I just thought I'd actually share. So far, we've built actually 7 topics from diode voltage, diode current, Ohm's law, these things. And when I say we've built that, that means we've built actually these little examples. This is diode voltage. This is diode current. This is actually Ohm's law. This is capacitors in series. And you know, there's a lot of items for each because we're just randomizing the numbers. So I think all of us kind of get the general sense of just what we're doing. But I will say that, more guidance maybe on actually how to structure these so that we are producing a coherent whole, I'm sure would be useful. Maybe actually Vasily actually can maybe actually help us guide us because we're
well, let me address that, Neil. My sense is, can you get any of your subject matter experts at WPI to simply take each problem and indicate which knowledge component it refers to?
I think we really need you guys to do. I mean, I don't know. Show one of the problems, Neil.
Well, so voltage diode meaning.
Is this at all what anyone cares about?
Can you over a little bit? I can't see it.
Voltage diode.
To the right.
Move it to the right, he says, or half the problem is cut off.
Ah, there we go. Interesting. What was your question, Neil?
Is this what you're looking for?
Well, not yes and no. This is kind of a funny question. I've never seen anything like this before. It's actually, in some respects, a trick question. The two opposing
scroll down, there's ones that aren't. These are the double direction ones. This one's the answers are 0. I've gone through the tutorial. So I've learned some things, but not really. There's a whole set, and then there's a set like this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, they're interesting because they're circuits that you would never see in real life. The two with the opposing diodes in series won't pass any current. It's the same thing as a broken wire. The two that are in parallel like this is the same thing as a short circuit. It's the same thing as a wire. So you'd never see these things in real life. They're basically conceptual questions in that respect. But they're dressed up to look like quantitative questions, which is kind of interesting and misleading in a sense. So I guess what we should probably be focusing on are questions that are not quantitative. So I'm sure you might even have some true blue quantitative questions instead of these tricky ones, where you actually have to pay attention to the fact that V1 is 6 volts and not 12 and that kind of stuff. Those true blue quantitative questions are probably not what we want, because that's what you use the model for on the one hand, and that analysis of circuits is not what these students are about. They're troubleshooters. So I don't think they're going to have very many of those kind of questions on any of their exams.
Okay, wait. You said not very many. Will they have some? Is there a portion? Is there a place for any of this quantitative stuff? Is it, I guess I really struggle with knowing what to do.
Let me ask this. I know that when we talked about the prerequisites, to understand Ohm's law or some of the other laws, sometimes you need to know something about quantification. And in my mind, I thought that having some problems like this, that if you find that they're having trouble, that they would go back and have some of these mathematically oriented sort of problems. Now, it may be that these conceptual problems are not right. it may be worthwhile for a subject matter expert to go through this, what they have created, and identify those that would be useful for those who need skill training on just how to think about Ohm's law with quantities. What do you think about that?
Let's see. These students are not even very good at arithmetic. They're okay, but they are not, how can I put it? They're your B students from high school. They passed algebra and so forth. And if you give them an equation, they'll solve it for you, as long as it doesn't require quadratics. So that's kind of where they're at mathematically. So they can solve these questions, at least these ones here with Ohm's law, and they can probably handle a few others too. But the math that you get into with semiconductors, it's not going to do them any good to solve those kind of problems. The math is over their head. It's not over their heads. It's just long, tedious, and not that useful. They need qualitative questions like, what is the purpose of biasing the base of the transistor? What does it mean to bias it? And they should answer, it keeps it in the active region. Okay, so that's the kind of qualitative question they need. Or you should say, if you put a good way to use that double diode things where the two diodes were in series and opposing each other would be just to say, why would you never see this circuit in real life? Mm-hmm. And they should answer, because it's the same thing as an open. So that's kind of probably where we should be focusing. More qualitative.
I guess I understand what you're saying, and as a math educator, I recognize that unless we're focusing on problem solving, we're not really doing our job at all. But I also understand that there is a background of some quantitative work that will help as you move forward. And so I'm just wondering, is there no space for a balance of that? Is there nothing of repeated practice that can be done to help these students who are trying to understand circuits?
And I guess actually the reason why you're saying that is obviously this is the crap we're good at. This is the crap we're actually good at actually being able to produce. The intelligent stuff that actually Kurt was saying, which is let's pull out one of these and explain conceptually why this should never occur, is not the sort of thing we'd ever put in a skill builder and actually ask you to do 3 of the exact same type in a row, because it's hard to write really good conceptual.
And I guess I'm trying to say that as an electronics tutor, that's this whole group, we have the conceptual stuff very well covered. So isn't there also a place for some of that other type of practice, that other type of learning? And I guess when I look at math education, I think that there is.
Well, I feel your pain in the sense that a couple of years ago made a transition from a math educator to a science educator. And science education is just not the same thing as math, and there's less emphasis on mastering a set of skills and so forth. But there are some things that are pretty fundamental that we do have to get them repeated on. So, for example, they absolutely must know which direction is the forward bias direction of a diode, and it's confusing. They got 2 choices, but they got to get it right, you know.
And so what you're saying is that they have to look at one of 300 different pictures, and for each one of those pictures say whether it's forward or backwards.
Probably not 300, but yeah, they have to drill. We have to drill them to kill on that one.
Right.
Okay. So, in the interest of time, could you identify the following, Kurt or Beth? If you were to think of like a 5 quantitative skill building exercises that would feed into a conceptual construct where they have to really have a good automated understanding of that construct, but it would help if they had some mathematics-oriented skill building. If you could identify about 5 of these for the people at WPI to work on, do you think that would be worthwhile?
Yeah, I think there's for each device there's probably about 3 or 4 things that really need to have skill building done to them, and that starts with, like, the most fundamental one is for batteries. they've been told that current flows from the, I get this wrong too, from the negative to the positive. But it's easy to get confused. So they need to like get a bunch of exercises. Here's a battery, and it's in the vertical orientation. Which way does the current flow? So these could be battery bulb circuits or battery resistance circuits. They just have to put the arrow going up or arrow going down. And they have to do it in all configurations because batteries can appear in circuits in all configurations. And you'd be surprised how specific memory is sometimes. Well, you wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, so if you could identify those and send it to Whitney and she can broadcast it on whatever those would be, that would be helpful because the WPI folks, they've developed a lot of material.
They just need the guidance.
And they just need the guidance on which of the ones with either symbolic pattern recognition exercises or anything quantification exercises for skill building to identify some. I think that would be helpful.
Right, because then we can just throw in all of our spaced practice, practice, all of that's developed. We just need the content to throw into that. And that's very different than what you guys do really well.
Right.
So I think that's where it can be a nice marriage of the different tools.
Right.
Okay.
Let me go on in the interest of time. Focus on November and December deliverable. Remember, I mentioned before we need beta versions for transistors and PN junctions, and alpha versions for another 4 topics. However, Kurt wants to define what a topic is. So let me go on to C. Okay, C is what we talked about. D is, this is the if-then-else coupling, and this is where, once we see what people have, we can do some if-then-else kind of dances between learning resources. So whether it's between Kurt, Dragoon and AutoTutor, or BB&N and Dragoon, or, so we might find, for example, in working one of these conceptual problems, that they may need skill building. Well, you can imagine for any given topic or problem, there can be this if-then-else sort of coupling between learning resources. And I just want to point out that to people, that you have that capability, and that capability is different than kind of like the student modeling mechanism, where you select the next recommendation based on what's stored in the XAPI in the record store on how they've, how well they're doing. So I like to think of it as kind of a curricular activity-based if-then-else coupling, and I do see that as different than the student modeling that is going on with the XAPI. Ben, am I thinking of this right?
I'm going to go according to this. If they say, and I'm going to check my list.
Sorry, I have a little trouble unmuting myself here. So, I mean, somewhat, yeah. I mean, kind of the general way I've been thinking about student modeling on this is that we want to be able to capture as much as possible as terms of what systems can produce, get those into something that's basically like an XAPI type learning record store, and then basically pull it out and do some inference over it into things that we actually care about. So it means the student model is not directly what we're storing in many cases. We'll be storing things that are smaller than what we care about coming out the other side. And so some of the things that come out the other side might be things that are like on the level of recommendation. Some of the things that might be coming out the other side would be things, like rough approximations of, student effort or how much they tend to be chatty or things like that. And so we have this sheet basically here of the student model feature. We tried to basically get we tried to get 2 things out of people, and I think everyone's at least put something in here now. In terms of saying, okay, what could your system send out that your system produced in terms of information that might be useful for your system or for other systems for anything persistent? And really what you'd want to be saying for sending out is anything that you would want to even log, because this would also be kind of the centralized logging for the system. You know, the worst that can happen is you send it out and we just ignore it, but we put it in a database somewhere, which is not a terrible thing to have happen. The other side, though, is to ask people, so you can see that on that thing there's basically in the left-hand column, it's send versus receive. Send is, I have this information in my system, I could send this somewhere if it was useful. The other one is receive, which is, you know, I would want to know this information would help my system to be able to do some adaptation, to do something in real time. And that's kind of separate from the fact that we also are going to be talking about, you know, recommender type stuff, which would be which activity, which is a little different. So basically the point of this sheet was to really have sort of a data dump of what people have there, what they can put out, what they want, so that we can try to agree on some sort of just common set of verbs. So when we're actually logging this stuff in the kind of format that we're logging, the verb is really about what's happening, what's happened. And the reason why it's important is like one of the things we're likely to want to have is something like hint. Like there's a lot of different systems that can give a hint to the user in some respect. And it's useful for all of them when they're logging it to say, okay, this is a hint, and provide what other information they can have, so that we can basically, because we can know what system it's from as long as it says what system it's from and the type of problem it's from. And we can also know that we had a hint, and then we can basically try to do some inference across there's multiple different systems providing hints. We're not going to have any data right now, so we won't be able to intelligently weight this stuff, but we'll at least be able to, you know, put in a guesstimate of how we want to add things together essentially for integration.
Let me say one other thing. If any one of us has a problem, now I'm not talking personal problem, I'm saying the activity or problem that we're just working on, and let's say there's 3 knowledge components. My hope, and Ben, please confirm this if you could, that by the end of that activity, they're going to send back, at the very least, values from 0 to 1 on each of those knowledge components to send back to for the Learning Records Store. Is my thinking correct on this?
I think it's fairly correct, yeah. I mean, basically, there are 2 potential approaches. I think that's the approach that we're going to go with, just because each person's activity will probably know better than we could integrate up at the top in terms of how well you've done on each knowledge component. So yes.
Yeah. With
that said, there other things can be sent that are below that level that are, you know, sort of, I would say that if you're going to calculate a score, send all the information that was required to calculate that score. That way, if we end up getting data from students and we decide, oh, actually those scores aren't exactly what seem to be very predictive, we can go over and reconstitute the scores with something better based upon the raw data that was being used to get those scores.
Sure. Let me just add a qualification to what I said. Among other things you might want to send in, at the very least, and this is important to me, at least in the thinking of this, at the very least, for each knowledge component, have some value based on their performance that varies from 0 to 1. So in addition to those 0 to 1s, and it might be a binary, they got it right or not, you know, in addition to the other stuff, please put in this document for Ben's purpose anything else you want.
Yeah,
so do I have it right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, and anything else that you'd want to be able to report. You know, for example, you know, things that we have like verbal fluency, like words per time, like essentially the number of words they're doing per statement when they do a statement. That's something that's valuable. The statements themselves. To go over and send off a message for when a student's given input. Things like that are all useful to be able to have as events that we have in kind of a common logging format. And we've kind of got, I think, most of the stuff in there. It'll be nice if people can do like a quick check over of kind of this new instruction and see if there's anything missing that they want in there, because then after this I'm going to try to do a pass and try to see what things kind of align up with what. So that we can potentially maybe try to agree on some labels and figure out some messages that different systems will send that we can then log.
Okay.
And basically, they'll be sent out in the same format that we're sending the existing messages. Like right now, we have the completed message, which is the main one that we send out, and the loaded message. Those are the only ones that assessments right now is going to deal with. But these other messages, like the knowledge component scores, would be like the completed messages, except they won't just be completed. It'll be that you're sending out a score specifically associated with the knowledge component. We're still going to have the overall score that we send out, but we'll have the knowledge component scores too.
Yep. Yep. Okay. You still there? Oh, you're still there. Okay. Let's go on the.
Okay, yeah. So I'm here, yeah. Again, so yeah. So that's kind of the general approach. Once we have that, I can process it up and make a proposed set of basically messages that we could use, and try to give people convenience functions so that they can send off those messages.
Sounds good. Let me, and we've already talked a little bit about the recommender system. Let me, at this point, can I ask both Kurt and Ben to present something next week on the 7th? Kurt, could you give kind of an overview in, say, 10 minutes of the content? Would you be willing to do that?
Just a second. I have some travel next week. Yeah, I can do that.
Great. Ben, could you spend 10 minutes talking about maybe something about the student modeling?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. And Christina or Neil, CNN, could you say what you want to say about integration with assessments? I don't know how much you might want to be presenting. What are your thoughts about that?
Are we going to be doing it to anyone more than Brent? Because last time he got sort of the big full picture.
Right. It may be that 5 minutes may be enough. Just kind of a general update on how you've collected all this material with the system.
Okay, so in order for us to do that, then we would want to have all this material added to the shared district folder.
Well, you could.
Can you guys all do that?
Either that or just, if you want just a 5-minute update on where you stand and what your plans are.
Well, I guess my question is, well, there's two. The integration within the iframe is done.
Right.
But the content creation, and I know maybe Whitney, you would have a better sense. Are you guys starting to crank out some assessments problems?
We are just still working on collecting all of the XMLs. We have not put anything new into assessments other than what we've already done. We are working on updates to our little, iframe or what we'll put in there, but we don't have anything new in assessments yet.
So my question actually, I was thinking earlier when you were talking about some of the if then else stuff, is whether we could have a little small version of that. So is there a string of content that we could try to put together before Wednesday that would show off anyone's ideas of the if then else?
I think we could. You and I did that last time for the demo. We just didn't really get to show it.
Yeah, we did, but honestly, I don't think you and I have a very strong understanding of electronics. So if someone who does could really tell a nice use case about a student who doesn't understand this, and I mean just to get it a little bit more specific, that would be great. But other than that, we could just show what it looks like, like we could show.
What I'm asking for is something very simple, very much simpler.
Yeah, we could just show a little mini version of what we did last time.
What I'd like is brag again about the fact that you've incorporated all these things in iframe.
Sure.
A reminder on that to trumpet our accomplishments is
on it. I can trumpet. I got it.
And anything else like showing an integration is just gravy. It's just gravy, right? Okay. Rohit, what are your thoughts? It would be nice to have everybody say something.
Yes, of course. If I have a couple of minutes, on the content side, I will update the sheet that you have with the different columns for that lifts.
That's great.
That would be great.
But my concern with that is the content that we already have will largely feed into the resistors part of that sheet. And so my question is, for new content that BBN will be developing, and there is only limited resource in terms of time for developing that, my current thought is to focus on transistor circuits, and if that is not something that the rest of the content team agrees with, just let me know so I can reshift that focus to align with
No,
what the goals are.
transistors is perfect.
Great.
Transistors
So
is perfect.
That's what we want alpha on.
That's what we want to eventually get a beta on.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
perfect. So I will develop more problems for transistors, but for the timing, I'll fill in that sheet with number of hits for the different knowledge components that we already have covered in the content that we have.
That would be perfect. That would be perfect.
Second,
Okay,
would you like me to present something next week? I'm perfectly fine not speaking next week, but if you would like me to, just let me know.
Could you present? I think the more it looks like we're all integrated, and we are, the better. So if you could present for what, 5 or 10 minutes, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that.
Now, I have a question. Could you, do you want to present that through assessment?
I think I'm just going to do a presentation instead of doing a demo.
Okay, just a presentation rather than a demo.
Yeah, it'll be short. I'll keep it to 3 slides, I think.
Yeah, okay. And send the slides and stuff to Whitney ahead of time.
Yeah, I'll email about what we just discussed here and do that.
Yeah.
I will. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bev, do you want to say anything?
You're muted.
Okay, so I have been looking for some terms to explain what we're doing. So I'll send it out a conceptual view of what we're doing with little paragraphs each. And if they're appropriate, we could just use that so you don't have to invent them. And I'm looking for conceptual problems that we could put into perhaps assessments, just a whole slew of them. So I'll send those when I get them.
Okay, so would you be happy to say a few words at our next week on the 7th when we have the Navy eyes on us?
I'd be happy to speak or not speak, whatever you want.
Okay, so here's something that I think would help us, Bev, is would you be willing to spend 5 minutes reflecting on one of the problems we're worried about in the future, and that's the recommender system.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
And we can preface it, say, this is one of our worries. We're all worrying about it. These are Bev's thoughts.
That's fine. I can do that. Yeah.
Okay. All righty. So I know we've run out of time, but I think, two real quick things. One is make sure you get your invoices in.
Yes.
And I know one case we still have to get the contract finalized.
Yes.
And so, but please be diligent because we want to be spending the money as we go so we can be begging for more money after the first of the year. So you can't be a beggar until you've been a spender. And, so that's one thing. The other thing is, at some point, and phrased in the NATO meeting, at some point we'll have to be clear and on the same page on intellectual property, because we've apparently, I'm looking at the Navy contract on that right now. We were asked to do that when I presented at the NATO meeting in Italy. We want to be clear, whatever it is, whether it's web services and you hide your own stuff, or what's shared with the Navy. At some point, we're going to have the discussion, and I just wanted to let you know about that. We're not going to be talking about that on the 7th, though. I just wanted to put it on the go stack, or something to think about.
Okay.
So that's all. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much, folks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks. Talk to you.
Thank you, everybody.
That's something that it's good to know because actually I need to merge with this other that one I might be so I can tell them in advance that I'm not for that I'll use one.
Yeah. So that's one. Now, here's what we're gonna do. There's for the engineering.
So have you shared that with me?
Yeah. Well, not yet. I'm just so. So for the engineering, there are two needs. One is we do this proposal. Another one is actually they have immediate needs. They're done?
They're done. Yeah.
Okay.